The night started out as unremarkably as any other in my quiet suburban neighborhood. After dusk, the world seemed to grow still, one porch light after another flickering off until the street was swallowed in calm. I couldn't have known that within a few short hours, my entire understanding of longing, of human connection, and of the deep ache of emotions would be altered forever. My name is Emily Carter. For most of my life, I've approached the world with a steady, practical mindset. I was always the sort of person who measured life by obligations, calendars, and responsibilities. Once I had been a wife, later a single mother, and now, in my early 40s, I was simply a woman learning how to balance herself after years of carrying the weight of others. My son, Daniel, was 20 and away at college, only a few hours' drive from home. The two-story house I lived in was modest, surrounded by neighbors I greeted politely but rarely welcomed inside. The silence within those walls had become familiar, almost comfortable, but on certain nights it pressed too heavily on me. During those moments, I would sit by the living room window, gazing at the empty street, wondering why the human heart never stops hungering for something more. It was one of those restless evenings that changed everything for me. The day had been draining. Work dragged on with endless meetings, stacks of paperwork, and the persistent ache in my shoulders from leaning over my desk too long. By the time I returned home, I felt hollow. I reheated leftover pasta, scrolled aimlessly on my phone, and convinced myself I'd turn in early. But when I lay in bed, sleep refused to come. My thoughts spun in circles, about the past, about paths not chosen, about Daniel growing into adulthood so quickly. My gaze wandered toward the empty chair at the dining table, and I felt again how my house was both sanctuary and prison, comforting yet suffocating. I tossed, turned, counted backwards, focused on my breathing, even tried soft instrumental music. Nothing helped. Finally, I slipped out of bed. Sometimes, only the night air could quiet the noise inside me. I pulled a shawl over my shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The street was bathed in the muted glow of streetlights. A cool breeze brushed my face, and the faint chirping of crickets filled the air. That was when I noticed him. Michael Anderson, my neighbor across the street. Michael was in his mid-40s, a widower raising a teenage daughter. Over the years, we had exchanged pleasantries, lent each other tools, and made casual comments about the weather or our lawns, but our conversations had never gone much deeper. That night, however, he stood leaning against his porch railing, eyes lifted toward the stars. "Can't sleep either?" I asked softly, surprising myself with the boldness. He turned and gave a small, weary smile. "Not tonight. Too much on my mind." There was a heaviness in his tone that echoed my own unease. "Same here," I admitted. "The silence feels louder when you can't sleep, doesn't it?" He chuckled gently. "It really does." For a moment we stood apart, two quiet figures under separate lamps, yet connected by the same shadow of loneliness. Then he crossed the street. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his hoodie as he approached my porch. I hesitated but didn't stop him. Up close, I noticed the lines of fatigue on his face softened by the warmth in his eyes. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Of course not," I replied, pulling out the chair beside me. First we sat in silence. Then he spoke. "I used to stay up with my wife on nights she couldn't sleep. We'd sit on the porch and talk about nothing. Dreams, crickets, anything. I miss that." His voice faltered slightly, though he steadied it quickly. I met his words with quiet empathy. Though I had known from neighborhood whispers that his wife had passed a few years back, I had never asked him directly. "I understand," I said softly. "I used to do the same with my husband, before it all ended." It was the first time I had spoken aloud, outside of my closest circle, about my divorce. Distance and resentment had gradually unraveled what once was love. Saying it now beneath the night sky felt strangely freeing. Michael nodded, as though he understood far more than I had revealed. "It's strange, isn't it? How much we can miss not only a person, but the feeling of not being alone." His words landed inside me like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through memories I had long pushed aside. We talked for hours after that. About his daughter, about Daniel, about the absurd struggles of adulthood no one warns you about. We laughed at silly details. My backyard fence that leaned awkwardly. His front gate that squeaked every time it opened. But underneath the laughter, something deeper stirred. It was in the way his eyes lingered on mine longer than necessary. The softness in his voice when he mentioned loss. The warmth that spread through me whenever he shared something vulnerable. That night, I realized that longing isn't always about physical desire. Sometimes it's the yearning to be seen, to be heard, to be understood without pretense. Sitting beside Michael, I felt alive again, alive in a way I hadn't in years. Midnight came. The street grew even quieter, but neither of us moved to leave. The air carried unspoken words, thick and lingering. "I should probably head back," Michael said at last, glancing toward his house. "Yeah," I replied, though my heart resisted. Before he rose, his gaze caught mine. An unreadable expression, but one I could feel deeply. "Thank you for tonight, Emily. I didn't realize how much I needed this." My chest tightened. "Me too, Michael." He crossed back to his home, and though the space beside me was now empty, it felt as though he had left behind an echo of himself in the air. That night stayed with me. When I finally went to bed, I could close my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from clarity. I had discovered something important. Longing isn't about desperation, nor is it fleeting desire. It's the recognition of your own solitude mirrored in someone else, the invisible thread pulling you toward them. From then on, Michael and I began speaking more often, sometimes in the mornings before work, sometimes on weekends when our paths crossed. The conversations were never forced, always steady, always meaningful. I don't know where this connection will lead. Maybe that isn't the point. That night taught me that longing is more than romance or companionship. It is awakening. It's proof that even in emptiness, the heart can still stir, still ache, still hope. Looking back now, I finally understand what true longing feels like. It is both painful and beautiful, an ache that reminds us we are alive, always reaching for something just beyond ourselves.